In the year 1985, something unusual began happening inside the CIA's most guarded network. One by one, Soviet informants simply disappeared. These were the men and women quietly feeding secrets to the United States. But the KGB had discovered them. They were taken away, interrogated for hours, and many never made it out alive. Among them was Oleg Gordievsky, a man living a life of shadows. On record, he was the KGB's station chief in London, but behind closed doors, he had been secretly working with MI6 for years. Then everything collapsed. During a routine visit to Moscow, Gordievsky was pulled into a relentless 5-hour interrogation. When he reappeared, he was bruised, shaken, and barely conscious. It seemed certain that his next stop would be a firing squad, and yet he survived. MI6 launched a desperate covert extraction, smuggling Gordievsky out of the Soviet Union by hiding him in the trunk of a car, driving him across the border under the watchful eyes of the KGB. For the next 9 years, Gordievsky kept replaying the same question in his mind. Who had exposed him? Who had shattered the entire CIA network inside the Soviet Union? He had no answer. Not until the truth finally surfaced. And today, in this video, we'll uncover the answers to those very questions. Stay with us. This is USMag. Aldrich Ames, a senior CIA officer with access to some of America's deepest secrets, was arrested and brought before a U.S. court. There he confessed. He admitted that he had been selling intelligence to Moscow for years, handing over the names of every Soviet asset working with the CIA, along with spies tied to other American and Allied agencies. On April 28, 1994, Ames acknowledged that he had betrayed more than 30 Western operatives and had compromised over 100 covert missions. Inside the KGB, he was known by a cold, unsettling codename, Kuklakol, the Bell, a single betrayal that reshaped the entire intelligence war of the late Cold War era. In the early 1960s, Britain was shaken to its core. A trusted intelligence officer, Kim Philby, had been unmasked as a Soviet spy, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the entire establishment. Now, decades later, Washington faced a crisis of its own. No one knew just how deeply Aldrich Ames had penetrated America's intelligence system, or how far his betrayal had spread. Ames wasn't just any analyst. He served as the CIA's chief of Soviet counterintelligence, a role that handed him access to almost every secret the United States held against Moscow. He knew the identities of field operatives, the missions underway, and he even sat in on meetings with other Western intelligence agencies. It was the perfect position for a mole. For nearly a decade, Ames fed the Soviet Union a constant stream of classified material. More than 100 covert operations were blown open. At least 10 Western intelligence officers lost their lives because of what he revealed. And on April 28, 1994, the man who played both sides was finally sentenced to life in prison. Among the operatives caught in the fallout was Oleg Gordievsky, Britain's most valuable source inside the KGB. Ames's betrayal didn't just expose his work, it cost the CIA 10 critical assets, including General Dmitry Polyakov, a legendary figure inside Soviet military intelligence who had quietly supplied the West with secrets for more than 20 years. This is why Ames is still remembered as the most destructive KGB mole in American history, a traitor whose guilt was undeniable and whose punishment came with no chance of parole. During that period, Gordievsky worked closely with MI6 and MI5, feeding Britain a steady flow of intelligence from inside the KGB. And it was through these channels, unknowingly, that he crossed paths with Ames. In those secure meetings, the KGB's most valuable double agent, embedded deep inside the CIA, was quietly collecting every word. Gordievsky later looked back and realized the full weight of the deception. He remembered how the Americans handled their debriefings, careful, methodical, hungry for details. "I admired them," he said. "I wanted to share everything I knew. But now I understand, Ames was right there. Every piece of intelligence I offered was being handed straight to the KGB. A betrayal hidden in plain sight, and one of the most devastating breaches in Cold War history." Before Aldrich Ames ever became a traitor, he was simply a young man entering the world his father once served. His father had been a CIA analyst, and when Ames dropped out of college, it was his father who opened the agency's doors for him. But the decision that would later shake the CIA wasn't rooted in ideology. It wasn't about loyalty to Moscow. It was about something far more ordinary and far more dangerous: money. In the 1960s, Ames actually performed well. He and his wife, fellow CIA officer Nancy Segabarth, were posted to Turkey, tasked with recruiting foreign intelligence assets. Back then, he looked like a promising officer. But by 1972, the picture had changed. His supervisors recalled him to CIA headquarters, believing he wasn't suited for field work. He studied Russian. He planned operations against Soviet officials. On paper, things looked steady, but underneath, something else was taking hold. Ames's father had battled alcoholism, and the same addiction soon consumed Ames himself. His drinking began to stall his career. There was the night in 1972 when a colleague found him drunk and in a compromising situation with a female officer. Then, in 1976, he left a suitcase full of classified material on a subway train. The decline was undeniable. Trying to salvage his reputation, Ames accepted an overseas posting to Mexico City in 1981. His wife remained in New York, but the distance didn't help. His drinking grew worse. In Mexico City, he crashed his car while heavily intoxicated, unable to answer police questions, unable even to recognize the embassy official who arrived to help him. Later, after a drunken confrontation with a Cuban diplomat, his supervisor recommended a full alcohol evaluation. But alcohol wasn't his only problem. Ames had a series of affairs, and one of them would change the entire trajectory of his life. In late 1982, he began a relationship with Maria del Rosario Casas Dupuy, a Colombian cultural attaché already assisting the CIA. Their romance escalated quickly, so quickly, that Ames chose to divorce his wife and marry Rosario, hoping to bring her back to the United States. Professionally, he continued performing well, but he couldn't climb the ranks. In 1983, he was recalled to headquarters and appointed Chief of Counterintelligence for Soviet Operations, a position that granted him access to some of the CIA's deepest secrets. But his personal life was unraveling. As part of the divorce, Ames agreed to cover old debts and to support Nancy financially every month. Then came Rosario's expensive tastes: the shopping, the long-distance calls, the lifestyle he could not afford. His finances collapsed. Debt mounted. Pressure tightened. Years later, Ames admitted to Senator Dennis DeConcini that money pushed him over the edge. "I felt crushing financial stress," he said. "But when I think about it now, I realize I let it grow far larger than it truly was." And that pressure would soon lead him down one of the darkest paths in CIA history. In the investigation that eventually uncovered Aldrich Ames, one FBI agent reflected on his actions. It was never about ideology, never about loyalty. It was always just the money. And he added, Ames never tried to convince anyone otherwise. This investigation would ultimately lead to his arrest, but the path had begun years earlier. On April 16, 1985, after a few drinks to steel his nerves, Ames walked directly into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. At the reception desk, he handed over an envelope. Inside were the names of several double agents, documents proving he was a trusted CIA insider, someone with access to the agency's deepest secrets. And with it came his demand, $50,000. According to a U.S. Senate report, Ames later claimed that at first he thought of it as a one-time deal, a way to escape his financial troubles. But he quickly realized he had crossed a line he could never step back from. For the next 9 years, Ames quietly supplied the KGB with some of the most sensitive intelligence the CIA possessed. And in return, the payments kept coming. Slow, steady, unrelenting. The man whose betrayal left some of the deepest scars in American intelligence, Aldrich Ames, has now passed away. On January 5th, 2026, the former CIA mole died at the age of 84. Yet the consequences of his actions didn't vanish with him. The lives lost, the operations destroyed, and the trust shattered inside the CIA. All of it remains a permanent part of America's intelligence history. Ames proved one thing with brutal clarity: sometimes it takes only one insider to break an entire system from within. If this story gripped you, subscribe to USMag and stay with us for more untold truths from the hidden world of espionage, power, and global intrigue.